Hi there, I'm Kevin McMahon, joined here by my friend Greg and Miguel. And I was asked by Greg and Adobe to talk about sort of my Olympic experience and how it relates to maybe a different approach to education. So a little bit of background on me. Hopefully you're seeing my slide deck. Can I get a confirmation? Yes? Okay, so for 23 years, I've been teaching at Bellarmine College Prep in San Jose. I've taught a range of digital media classes, graphic design, video production, character design, animation. And that allows me to teach a huge range of Adobe apps. I was telling Miguel earlier, I'm kind of one of those digital media weirdos. I can't get enough of it. I love the creative possibilities of working with Adobe apps. I pretty much every time they come out with a new one, I'm that guy that wants to try every button and see what we could what we could use to empower students. So I'm passionate about the products, passionate about education. I do a lot of freelance work, so logos, typefaces, illustration and poster design. Most recently, along with Greg, I have been doing a lot of character design. If you haven't checked out Adobe's Character Animator, it is an incredibly powerful tool where you can essentially capture your movements on your webcam and have a pre-built character that in real time animates your gestures. So if you've ever been interested in doing any animation or doing something maybe a little bit different with your instruction and you wanted to host a Zoom as a character, that's what Adobe Character Animator allows you to do. So Greg and I have been building heads of curriculum for a little bit, and it's just a super fun project and a great app. But back in the day, yeah, I spent 20 years in pursuit of my Olympic dream. And I threw the hammer. So I probably need to answer that burning question. What is the hammer throw? Okay, so 16-pound ball on a 4-foot wire with a triangular handle. On a world-class throw, the ball goes about 60 miles an hour. The centrifugal force reaches up to 500 pounds. The ball flies higher than an 8-story building and nearly the length of a football field. It's always better to show than to tell, right? So here is Sergei Litvinov of the Soviet Union throwing in Cork, Ireland. Essentially, it's like making your own roller coaster, and it's really exhilarating, and it's frankly really hard. No one's a natural at it. It's a pretty unnatural movement, but a lot of fun. Okay, we could watch it all day, but in my pursuit of this dream, I do want to say up front that this was a group effort. I had a lot of mentors, teammates, training partners without whom I wouldn't have made an Olympic team. So I do not want to come off as like, hey, I figured all these things out on my own. Much of what I'm going to be sharing today was passed on to me by some very gracious people who were willing to work with a very, I would say, undersized athlete. And they allowed me to achieve my Olympic dream. So I want to give credit to those people up front here. So what is, though, an Olympic approach to education? How would I take the best practices and habits from Olympians that I lived with or trained with and put them into a class? At the beginning, I do feel compelled to say that I genuinely believe that education is far more important than the Olympics. I have often said that I think being a teacher is more difficult and more honorable than being an Olympian. I've done both. Um, there is something truly altruistic about education and noble about it that I want to make that really clear. So I'm probably talking to some of my heroes right now. If you're a teacher, if you've dedicated your life to helping others, you have my utmost respect. So thank you for being here. The second thing I wanted to point out is that, uh, and I think the Japanese word kaizen embodies this pretty well. This term means continuous improvement. I do want to make it clear that this is a work in progress. I'm pretty much every time I teach my design classes, I do it differently. I try to learn something. I try to make it better. You might very well be doing many of the things that I'm going to share, or maybe even doing some of those things even better. And I want to make that clear that I'm with you on this journey of education, trying to always get better. Okay, so in my brain for a very long time, I did silo education from athletics. Those were two distinctly different things, but it took a long time for me to realize that the traits that we're trying to instill in athletes and in students are largely the same. And actually our goal is very similar too. We're trying to help a young athlete perform well in a athletic contest, but we're also trying to help students perform well in school or on a project or on a test. So the goal really isn't that different. I would also point out that the factors that contribute to performance are also, there's a lot of overlap. There's also some myths that I think are very similar. So when I was growing up, I really did believe that, you know, an Olympic athlete was someone that had some supernatural physical abilities, and then it was sort of predetermined. And it took me a long time to realize that most of them are pretty normal individuals who just have an exceptional amount of motivation for whatever reason. And we'll talk more about that. And I would say the same is true of academics. In the 20 years that I've taught, those students who are highly motivated would always exceed those that seem to have any natural sort of ability or predisposition. So again, I do feel like there's some common factors involved in athletics and academics. But there are some differences, and that's really what I want to focus on. So the rest of this is going to be broken up into 3 key areas where I think there's areas for growth: motivation, instruction, and evaluation. The way that I saw great coaches and athletes kind of do things a little bit differently that I think could be instilled in academia. So a little bit of background on motivation. So when I was a kid, this was the book that was in my bedroom, and I spent a lot of time in my younger years paging through it because I thought these were people who had really, you know, done something like, you know, the most jumping jacks, or, you know, world's strongest man, or, you know, it just there was some draw there to do something epic. And I think we all have some sense of that, you know, especially growing up. So when I was 12 years old, the Olympic Games were in Los Angeles. And in the opening ceremonies, the host nation comes out last in the Parade of Nations. So here's the US team coming out of the tunnel. You know, there's a billion people watching this on TV. And out comes this guy carrying the flag, and it says Ed Burke, USA, and then it says hammer throw. And it has this tiny little thing there that says Los Gatos, California. And that's the town next to where I grew up. And so I'm putting 2 and 2 together, that the epic thing that I've always wanted to do, this guy is done, and he lives near me. And now, you know, I'm fired up. I really want to know, like, okay, what is this hammer throw thing, and how can I be like Ed Burke? So as it turns out, Ed and a bunch of Olympians start coaching kids after the Olympics. And I get to be coached by this guy. But I'm terrible at it. The first time I threw the hammer, I literally fell down. The hammer goes into the cage. Probably a little bit of giggling around me. I'm awful at it. So there's really no reason I should have stuck with it because I was not naturally sort of gifted in this domain. So it's kind of, my reasons for sticking with it, I don't think were well articulated in my own mind until I came across this book. If you haven't seen Daniel Pink's TED Talk, I would also recommend that. But in summary, he points out that while there are extrinsic awards that do work for certain tasks, particularly short-term physical tasks, when the requirement is something cognitive, like sales or design, really we're drawn to these intrinsic motivations, mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So I'm going to be hammering those sort of throughout the presentation here, because that really is, that sort of explained to me, why did I do this? Why did I spend 20 years out in the mud, throwing a hammer, doing this weird thing? And it largely comes down to, it was hard. I was terrible at it. And I really wanted to figure this thing out. Secondly, there was autonomy involved. I got to pick it. My parents didn't tell me to do it. No coach made me go to practice. Every day that I had practice, it wasn't a grind. It was the best part of my day. And there was a purpose. I really felt like, competing Olympics for me was going to be something that was, a guiding force that was going to give me, was going to be able to center sort of many of my decisions around it. So when I slept, who I hung out with, what I ate, all those things that sort of dictated my day were dictated by this event. So really, these are the driving factors that I think are most important. Now, when I look at that and contrast it with education, now I want to point out that this is sort of traditional education. Again, it might be very different from what you're doing. Where mastery, autonomy, and purpose are things that I see guiding many Olympic athletes, including myself. When I look at academics, I know that I have oftentimes just said, okay, you're my class, let's go. And I've skipped this step. And I think a lot of teachers have done that, where we don't explain why you need to know this or why you should want to know this. And it's so crucial because it's the fire that keeps them interested. And oftentimes the presumption is, well, it's because of grades. We think, okay, well, you buy into this sort of idea that, well, if you get a good grade, then you're gonna, take the next step into a good college, then take the next step into a good, job. So there's some future, thing that you have to do this class for the grade. And as it turns out, I think grades are essential. It's just part of our system, but I think the way we use them could be improved. So I'm going to talk a lot about how maybe there's a different way we could use grades. And I need to explain sort of the pitfalls here to make this point. Let's say we were to compare or to use grades for my athletic experience. First time I did it, I would definitely get an F because it went 0 feet. And then later in that semester, maybe I figured out a little bit. I threw 80 feet. Then finally, I threw 170, and that's maybe in the top 10 in the country in the first year for my age group. Okay. But I still, because it's averaged, I get a 2.5. And that's a pretty not impressive GPA. So if we're applying the average grade to my athletic, beginnings, I've not done well at all, and no college should ever accept me. I should just stop, right? That seems to be the message, and that's the message I think we send to students when we start using grade averages in this way. So let's call our student here. Let's call him Doug. So Doug gets an F, let's say, on his first science paper, and it could be for whatever reason. Maybe there's a problem at home. Maybe he's sick. Maybe Maybe he wasn't prepared by his previous school to succeed. But over the course of the semester, what if Doug proves to be a genius in this domain, and he's turned in a Nobel Prize winning paper at the end? Well, due to averages, it really doesn't matter. Doug's still going to get a C+. And that's criminal. I think that's tragic that could happen to a student, that we could disenfranchise them with grade permanence and averages in this way. And so there's got to be a better way that we can work with grades. And how many of us, if we knew from the beginning, if we stumbled at the start of a race, would get up and run full sprint? In a class, if you've already bombed your first test, it's pretty hard to want to do the work if you know you're already way behind. The other thing about grades and the way that we use them is that it's kind of like if we had 3 paths, right, to $100 here. I think all of us would want to take the shortest path. It's just, thinking efficiently. And students are no different. They know that if there is an easiest path to an A, that's what they're going to do. Why would you risk doing anything else, right? And so there are some side effects when we use grades this way. Really, there's no reason to work any harder than the maximum grade. And there's absolutely no reason to say something different than what the teacher has imparted, or try something else. That's pretty risky, right? And so we don't really encourage the very things that we want students to exhibit, right? Creativity, autonomy, exploration. Okay. And lastly, the thing that I think is difficult with grades is that when we start off with the highest possible score, which is quite possible if you get an A on your first test, it's kind of like playing the world's worst video game. Imagine a video game where you had all the features unlocked, right? You've got your jetpack, your lightsabers, but over time, your character could only get worse or hold on, right? No one wants to play that game, right? Like, why would you keep playing if your character can only hold on or get worse? Right? We want to do the opposite thing. We want to improve over time. It's very much like students are walking a tightrope, and they're trying to hold on to that A and get across the semester. And the chief emotion they experience is relief. And the chief emotion of learning and bettering yourself should be joy, not relief, right? This is really stressful. So when I look at other domains of life, things that students want to do, they level up, right? Whether it's athletics or martial arts or video games, I wanted to see how far I could go, right? That was the draw. When we look at video games, this is a huge psychological sort of, I don't want to say trick, but it is what makes people stick around. Like, how far can I go in this game? How good can I get? And it's a process of leveling up. For my class, which I've called the Design Dojo, and a lot of other teachers are using my resources, which is great. And it's kind of a collaborative effort now. We purposely build in a leveling up system. And the end goal is also not just a sense of mastery, but also to use our design skills to benefit others, to help nonprofits, okay? But we have mastery challenges, and students take these autonomously. They can choose which challenges they want, and they can literally level up in that process. And there's a whole belt rank system so that there's a constant sense of I can do more, right? And that draw keeps them engaged, keeps them motivated, just like in video games and in sports. So in my experience, it is not that students are lazy. They want to master things, and they spend all of their free time doing that, whether it's video games or sports or, skateboarding or music. These are all things they know they can get better at, because there's this draw to what else can I unlock? What can I achieve, right? And we can use that in academia. The next domain would be instruction. So motivation in my brain kind of comes at the beginning, right? You got to make them want to do the work. But then the work itself of learning, instruction, is very different in my experience. In the Olympic Games, it was very personal. I had a personal relationship with my coach. Everything was based on copying other great athletes and doing what they did. I was allowed to experiment. And there was real world applications. And oftentimes in academia, we tend to drift from that. And we've kind of lost sight of that because it wasn't always the case. Again, I had a very personal relationship with all my coaches. I was telling Greg earlier that it would not be uncommon for them to ask me things like, how are you doing today? How do you feel? Like, are you ready to learn this today? Are you in a space where you can learn? What did you eat well? Did you sleep well? And we would never, I think now it's become much more the norm to keep kind of a distance and not make it personal. And I think it's at our disadvantage. This was not always the case. So when we look at the Renaissance and the great masters, here I've got a work by Rubens, which is sort of true. We'll get into that. His relationship with his master, so the apprentice-master relationship, was very close. And he had to literally copy his master's work until he could, maybe let him do a little bit on, some fresco or some drawing. And there was clear mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Where now I do feel like we sort of tend to usher students through, like, now you've got this subject, now you've got this subject, rather than let's really get to know you and meet you where you are and teach to who you are right now. I mentioned this is sort of true that this is Rubens' work. This is actually the Battle of Anghiari, which was a fresco by Da Vinci. Great story. Michelangelo and Da Vinci had a throwdown. It was a contest. They were both supposed to paint the Battle of Anghiari. We've lost both their works, and all that remains is this one drawing by Rubens. So Rubens sat there in front of Da Vinci's fresco and copied it. And that's how he got good, by copying, which leads me to copying is natural and good. Now, to be very clear, I'm not saying plagiarizing is natural and good. I'm saying in the learning process, this is oftentimes discouraged or is sort of a lost art. But when we look at how we learn how to speak, how to walk, how to ride a bike, it's all copying, right? That is a natural state of learning. When I was a kid, everyone who watched an NBA game would immediately go out after the game to the playground and try to be like Mike. We would all try to do the dunks on the low hoop. We would copy. That's how we got better. As a hammer thrower, I was in a weird position where I was left-handed. I still am. But all the great throwers are right-handed. So I would actually watch the Soviet hammer throwers in a mirror with the video playing behind me so that they'd be lefty. And I would watch them until I literally, I'd want to puke. It was like hours and hours of watching these great throwers because I really wanted to figure it out. And I did it by copying. The very first assignment I have in my graphic design class is essentially copying. These are photos that students picked and then broke out Adobe Illustrator and looked for values, shapes of value. So looking for the highlights, midtones, and shadows, really trying to see differently. And yes, the initial form is something that a photographer found in their lens, but by copying what they saw in a photo, you can see, and in some cases, these are high school freshmen. Uh, they were able to see the world differently and copy some nice photo into a work of illustration. And if I asked them to start from scratch and just make this would not be possible. So oftentimes, I think this is the process of learning in athletics, right? Where we watch someone do something really well, we try to figure out, okay, well, what is that? How did they move? How did Michael Jordan hold the ball, right? And then we go and play. We play a lot, we experiment. And when we figured out, that's how he did it, right? Or that's how this Soviet hammer thrower, turned his feet, whatever it might be. Then we try to ingrain that, and then later we actually get to compete and perform. This is almost identical to the design thinking process that has become very popular. And not to be outdone, the good folks at the British Design Council came up with the double diamond, which is very similar, right? But in the middle here, this whole idea of divergent thinking, if you're unfamiliar, convergent thinking is finding the right answer, right? So a date, like, when was the Declaration of Independence signed, right? There's one right answer. But divergent thinking is, here's a paperclip, what could it be? What could you use it for? And how many solutions can you come up with? And it turns out divergent thinking uses more of your brain, and there's actually an emotional state of joy that comes along with it. So sometimes we lose sight of that when all we're doing is asking for facts or repetition and not so much exploration. And in that exploration, there's a stigma sometimes that I know I've fallen into, where I'll work on something and the design doesn't quite work, and so I might deem it a failure. But as it turns out, we really want to redefine that when we are experimenting as educators, we have to recognize that when we learn to do any of those things that are sort of innate to our being, walking, talking, learning to ride a bike, we probably failed a few times, but we had to do that to eventually succeed. So they're not failures. They're steps along the way.
Kevin, just before you, sorry, could you just go back one slide? I just wanted to interject and just ask you about, because I totally get this and I totally agree, but just wondering about your teaching and how you bring failure, how you bring failing forwards, failing to succeed, however you call it. How do you actually achieve that with your students? Because, I've had lots of goes at this, and I'm sure lots of people who are here have tried and perhaps been really successful, but it is quite difficult when the education systems globally are based on not failing. Got any thoughts or ideas about how that might work?
Yeah, so I think hopefully this helps clarify that, because in my design class, a key part of that is ideating, right? So if I'm designing a logo for a client, I might make a dozen variations before I show them maybe the top 3. It doesn't mean that 9 of them are completely disasters. Those 9 are not failures. They're the concepts on a ladder that led me to the better solution. So they're, it's like Thomas Edison said, I found 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb that led to me making a light bulb. Like he had to do all those. If you listened to Tesla, maybe he could have got there a lot sooner. But yeah, it's redefining the experimentation as, hey, I'm exploring here. And if an exploration or an ideation or an idea doesn't work, fine. It's going to eventually lead to a good solution. So the FedEx logo with the the arrow that every designer really loves in the negative space, it took them 200 tries. And it wasn't 199 failures, right? They all had to happen to get to this great solution. And the other thing that exploration does is it does build the number one trait when psychologists look at people across domains. It literally doesn't matter if it's athletics, academics, arts, music. The key characteristic that they've associated across the board is resilience. And by exploring and failing, and being okay with that and not dwelling on it, people will eventually lead to success. This slide, these are all books that are kind of celebrated as some of the best in their genres. And the numbers next to these books are the number of rejections they got from publishers. So the resilience is the shared trait that we find with people that we look to as being successful. And so they had to try lots of things, and we have to allow for that in education. One of my good friends, hammer thrower Lance Steele, funny story, he actually thought he didn't make the final. He was in 9th place at the Olympics. And he was literally packing his bag, walking off the field. And they said, oh, turns out in the Olympic Games, we don't break ties, and you're actually tied for 8th. You're not in 9th place. And so he goes from walking off the field thinking he's done to, oh, you've got 3 more throws. And he goes in there and ends up winning the silver medal. Now, he could not have done that if he hadn't built some sort of resilience, some sort of like ability to regroup under pressure and not dwell on the past. Same thing holds true for logo design. So, if a client really hated some ideation I made here and I just fixated on that and never moved on, we'll never get there. And so exploring, I think there's joy in that, again, divergent thinking, but learning to let go of this idea of failure and seeing it as a natural part of learning. We all fell down before we learned to walk. Thank goodness we didn't give up, right? And in these domains, it only takes one good solution, right? So the idea of keep going is built into that exploration. So the last sort of key area here for, I think, an opportunity for improvement is evaluation. Again, I see some key differences between what's done in maybe at the athletic, at the Olympic level in athletics, and what happens in academics. To sort of break these down one at a time, I'm going to keep on going here. So Salman Khan, who founded the Khan Academy, actually spoke at my school, and he told a great story. He said, imagine we're in a math class, or I'm sorry, a juggling class, and we're going to learn to juggle baseballs. And half of you can juggle 3 balls, and that's great. But the other half can only do 2. Well, tomorrow we're going to come back and juggle 3 chainsaws. Well, it's going to be pretty hard for those who could only do 2 baseballs to figure out 3 chainsaws. And we do this, he argued, in classes like math that naturally build from one step or one concept to the other. It's going to be very hard for a student to do division if they don't understand multiplication. And yet we kind of just say, well, this year we're doing division, so too bad. And so that student falls behind. So by basing things off mastery, really knowing that a student has it down rather than just kind of pushing them through, we get to a much better result. Sorry, my deck there went a little wonky. And if the greatest, biggest companies in the world are allowed to reimagine and constantly, rebrand and update, we need to allow students to do that too. So one of the things that I do in my class related to mastery and Kaizen and continuous improvement is when they turn in a final project, it's not actually the final. I give them an entire week after we've gone through the entire process and say, look, this is my last round of comments. You've got a week now to give me something based off my comments or something that you've discovered to make it even better, because that's what happens with real clients all the time. I go 3 or 4 rounds working with a logo. They want to change the color, they want to change the font. So we have to allow students to continuously improve and try to get to mastery as well. Okay.
Kevin, just a warning, we're sort of 5 minutes or so before Q&A.
So Ernie Sheldon, everyone thought he was going to break the high jump world record, which was, or he was going to be the first person to jump 7 feet. And so he put up a line of tape in his room at 7 feet, and he really fixated on it. And sadly, even though he was one of the best high jumpers in the world, he never actually did it. And sometimes we as educators fall, I think, into the same trap. We focus so much on the end results and we miss the process that gets us there. So one thing I think we can do is offer points, credit, some sort of reward for contributions along the way. So this might be in design, this might be turning in a mood board. It shows me your research. It might be show me your ideations. Show me all the different ideas you came up with and giving you some credit for that, right? And by rewarding the process, right, we tend to get to a better result rather than just saying, hey, I'm just going to wait till you turn in your final thing, which could have been made better if the process was improved. Ruth Butler, researcher, did an interesting experiment where she found, when we're talking about evaluation, she found that just knowing that something was going to be graded decreased both the level of interest and the performance. And this is both in divergent and convergent tasks. So the comments, right? That's the critical stuff. Greg and I were talking earlier, how personal, how important, how lasting those are. One way that I talk about that in my class is I have students take the monkey test. If you're not familiar with the monkey test, for 10 seconds, try to not think about monkeys. And if you're like me and almost every student I've ever had, that's not really possible. The idea of not thinking about something is the very act of not thinking about it is still thinking about it. It's like me telling my daughter, do not eat that cookie. Well, now she wants to eat the cookie more than ever. And yet as coaches, sometimes we say things like, hey, do not strike out. Well, now that athlete's much more likely to strike out. Or, do not use that font. That's not helpful. What we want are actionable, positive directed comments. Don't use that font. Maybe use these others. Maybe don't use that color. Maybe consider using these color harmonies instead. That gives them something to do rather than what not to do, right?
Kevin, I just before you shift on, and I know we're short of time, but some of the conversations that we've had about, offering genuine, authentic, friendly feedback is the most powerful. I personally believe, as a teacher for many, many years, it's the most powerful weapon an educator has. And I think you are, you're on the same lines there.
Yeah, when I was in college, I asked people, why did they major in what they majored in? Almost every single time they would point to a teacher. And they'd say, this one teacher said this one thing or made this one subject exciting to me. And it was something they said. It wasn't that they got a good grade. It was because they said something that resonated with them for life. And that's how powerful these comments can be. When we're talking about evaluations, I've got this crazy slide here. It's a combination of a bunch of different research. But the emotional cycle of change basically refers to, you want to try something new. It could be skateboarding, playing an instrument, it doesn't matter. At the start, you think, hey, this is gonna be great, I'm gonna be good at it. And then suddenly you actually try it and you're like, oh buddy, like this is much harder than I thought. Well, the thing that gets you out of the valley of despair, invariably, is someone who knows how to do it and helps you through. And that is where teacher comments, evaluations are so critical. Okay, in the interest of time.
We're really running short of time now, so we might need to speed that last bit up.
Plug that. My hope is that we use grades differently, that we might think about incorporating a slope that tells a bit of a story of how students have done over the semester. Are they getting better? Because right now, all of these have the same GPA, but the story behind these students is very different, and we should know that as educators. I hope that we focus more on portfolio-based assessment, particularly for things like admissions. What has the student built? What have they written? What's their story? And I do want to acknowledge here at the end that I am incredibly grateful to Adobe for allowing me to do these things that I'm talking about, because I do see an increased engagement because they know they're working with professional tools. And because they're professional tools, their quality of work is better too. I've had students who literally will start design t-shirt companies and things while they're high school freshmen, and no one cares how old they are, right? It's just that the work is good. These are 21st century life skills. The ability to participate in the world of ideas and communicate effectively online is huge, particularly these days. So again, I do feel indebted to Adobe for that. The other great thing is, and Miguel was actually talking about this earlier, how there's so many possibilities with so many different apps, having so many different tools, that it really expands and empowers you in ways that were unprecedented. I can make things now that I couldn't even thought of when I was Miguel's age, when these tools didn't exist. And then the idea that you as a student could create something that moves people, that informs people, that generally betters the world right now. There's no need to wait because you've created a compelling video or animation or work of graphic design. As an educator, that's all you want to do. And again, I owe Adobe a great amount of gratitude for the ability to empower students this way. So that's it. I know it's a lot in 40 minutes. I did want to leave a little bit of time if I did. I don't have a clock here, so fire away. What do you got?
Yeah, I think we've literally, Miguel, we've got like a couple of minutes. Is that right?
Yeah, we have 2 minutes specifically.
2 minutes. So if there are any key questions, please do let us know. Kevin, I've got, just while they're coming in, there's lots of, if you are looking at the chat, lots of nice praise and lots of interesting things. The key question that I wanted to ask, and that I'd be interested in knowing what other people feel, but essential skills is something that we keep talking about. And we talk about creativity, and you mentioned autonomy, collaboration. We wouldn't all be here without all of these things. Is that something that is key to your, is that important in your teaching? Here you go, here's a challenge. In a minute or less, tell us how you do all those things, because.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing I think that is motivating, and that I try to impart at the beginning of every semester and at the beginning of every project. So, if students are designing a logo, I would ask them, like, if you had a company tomorrow, what would its name be? What industry would you be involved in? So there's a lot of autonomy there, right? They get to make it on anything, and it's based off of their interests. And then mastery is, what's the best possible solution? Can I, given all of these explorations, what's really going to move people in the audience that I'm trying to attract? And then purpose is sort of innate, like it's your business. You want it to succeed, right? So I think the challenge is to constantly remind them, like, hey, this is why you want to get really good at this, because it's fun, but it's also in your interests. And then you can use this as transferable skills. What you learn working with an Adobe app doesn't have to be for graphic design. Maybe you're going to create a slide deck, or maybe you're going to create a t-shirt or a poster or a business card for some other facet. So I've had students who end up being, scientists, lawyers, doctors, who have to do a presentation, and they're like, thank goodness I could make this chart, or I could explain this clearly because of the skills I learned in your class.
And these are digital skills that they're never going to lose, that give them employability angles and get them into college.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And to participate in the world of ideas online right now, you have to know how to do some of these things.
I think, Miguel, are we at time? I
Yeah.
saw lots of nice comments. I didn't see any more questions. There's some really interesting stuff there. And I threw in 2 of Kevin's websites that are worth looking at, Design Dojo and Heads of Curriculum. So just in case you randomly saw those,
Yeah.
check those out.
So we should be good. If there's any other questions. Oh, yes. Yeah, again, how Greg said, keep an eye on the chat for all the websites we mentioned during the presentation. And if you guys have any other questions or concerns about the actual Winter Games, refer back to a post I put in the chat about just to see the other events later today. But if that's it, again, thank you guys so much for presenting and for everybody for joining us today. And we should be good.
And Kevin, thank you for sharing all your brilliance with us. It's
Thank you
always
so much.
brilliant to tune in.
It really was an honor. Thank you for having me.
All right, then, guys. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Cheers,
That was
folks.
awesome.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.